The road seemed calm that afternoon, until the sound of twisting metal shattered the silence and made the hearts of everyone passing by freeze. A car had overturned, smoke billowing and flames beginning to engulf the bodywork. On the hot asphalt, an injured mother screamed in despair, her face covered in blood and dust, begging for help. "My daughter, she's still in there." Her voice cracked as drivers stopped in the distance, paralyzed by fear of the imminent explosion. Time seemed to race faster, every second a death sentence for the child trapped in the wreckage. And then, amid the confusion, a soldier who was traveling suddenly stopped, threw open the door of his own car, and ran without hesitation. His look wasn't one of doubt, but of determination. The crowd shouted at him not to take any risks, but nothing could slow him down. With every meter he approached, the scene became more tense, as if the child's life was counting down, and his fate, for the first time, depended on the courage of just one man. The heat of the flames was already searing his skin as he pressed himself against the car's deformed door. The smell of leaking fuel indicated that only moments remained before everything exploded. The mother, on her knees, screamed her daughter's name, her voice mingling with the roar of the fire which crackled ever louder. The soldier pulled on the doorknob, but the metal was locked, glowing red, as if resisting his strength. He then used his shoulder, pushed, kicked, and each impact felt like a struggle against fate itself. From inside, a weak voice echoed, "Mommy!" That plea pierced the hearts of everyone present. Time, cruel, seemed to shrink to seconds. And just when everyone thought it would be too late, the soldier summoned every ounce of energy, let out a scream that echoed like a roar, and smashed the door open. But at that exact moment, a spark ignited on the gasoline-soaked ground, illuminating the scene with a deadly light. What would happen in the next few seconds would forever change the lives of everyone on that road. The highway cut through the American countryside on a sultry afternoon, the heat rippling across the asphalt as if the ground itself were about to catch fire. Cars sped past, truck drivers continued on their way, and nothing seemed out of the ordinary until a sharp metallic sound echoed like thunder. Tires screamed against the asphalt, glass shattered, and within seconds, a vehicle violently overturned, spinning around until it came to a twisted halt on its side on the shoulder. Dust rose like a curtain, hiding the scene for a moment, but soon reality emerged before their incredulous eyes. Smoke, the smell of gasoline, the menacing crackle of flames beginning to consume the wrecked car. From inside, a shrill scream pierced the air, but was quickly silenced by the slam of her body against the steering wheel. The passenger door slammed open, and a woman stumbled out, her knees trembling, her face streaked with blood and tears. Her eyes, red with despair, didn't seek help for herself, but fixed on the still smoking vehicle. She fell to her knees on the hot asphalt and screamed with all her remaining strength, "My daughter! My daughter is trapped in there." Her voice carried the oldest, most instinctive pain in the world, the fear of losing a child. Curious drivers stopped nearby, but no one dared approach. The fear of the explosion, the suffocating smoke, the horrific scene paralyzed everyone. Some simply raised their phones to record the scene, others murmured low prayers, but no one acted. Time seemed to mock the situation, passing too quickly for the child who remained unconscious in the wreckage. The mother tried to get up, but her legs wouldn't obey. She screamed, begging, unable to reach the car, and then a vehicle coming from the other side of the road stopped abruptly. The doors flung open, and a man jumped out. He wasn't in full uniform, but anyone who looked closely would recognize his posture, the rigidity of his muscles, and the haircut. He was a soldier. His eyes didn't waste time assessing risks. They focused only on the distraught mother and the car about to explode. While everyone hesitated, he advanced resolutely, each step echoing like a sentence that he would not turn back. The crowd's silence gave way to murmurs, some begging him not to risk it, others predicting the worst. But he no longer heard anything. Within his chest only one certainty pulsed. No matter the fire, no matter the risk, an innocent life was trapped there, and no military training had prepared him to watch it idly. His body lurched forward, and every second that brought him closer to the smoke and heat transformed him, not into an ordinary soldier, but into a hero whom fate had placed on this road to face his most personal battle. The soldier pressed forward against the hot wind blowing from the smoke, feeling the thin air slicing into his lungs like razors. The smell of fuel was suffocating, piercing his nostrils, and bringing back memories of training camps, but none of that compared to the urgency burning within him now. His mother screamed behind him, her voice hoarse from pleading, repeating her daughter's name as if each syllable could keep her alive for a few more seconds. The soldier didn't look back. His eyes were fixed on the car, which was already trembling, flames licking the leather seats and spreading through the twisted doors. He stepped closer, braced his hands on the burning metal, and recoiled as the pain shot through his arms like a red-hot iron. The metal burned, but his life inside was worth more than any wound. He stepped back just to catch his breath, pulled back his closed fist, and punched the side window. The shards scattered across the floor, cutting his skin, but the blood dripping from his fingers didn't stop him from reaching inside. The heat inside was unbearable. The smoky air drained the strength from his lungs, but deep inside, he saw her. A fragile little girl, her face smeared with blood and dried tears, restrained by her seatbelt. His heart raced. "I'm here!" he shouted, as if the child could hear him through her numbness. But she didn't react, only let out a faint moan. The belt was locked, caught in the dented iron, and with each second the fire advanced further, crackling like a hungry monster. The soldier pulled at the buckle, trying to break it with the strength of his fingers, but nothing would budge. Behind him, voices shouted for him to get out of there before the explosion, but it sounded distant, like an irrelevant echo compared to what was happening. He knew that every fraction of a second could be the child's last. With his fist clenched, he struck the belt loop repeatedly, until the buckle finally disengaged with a metallic snap. He slipped his strong arms under the girl's body and lifted her carefully, feeling the heat of the metal clinging to her clothing. Time seemed frozen in that instant. The mother, in the distance, recognized the movement and screamed louder, as if her voice could reach her daughter, rescuing her from the brink of death. But at the same moment, a spark on the ground took the form of a flame, and fire raced through the liquid spreading from the tank. The soldier felt the vibration beneath his feet, knowing it was a warning. There was nothing left but moments before everything would be consumed. With the child clutched tightly in his arms, he threw himself backward, breaking through the shattered window. The glass cut into his back, but the pain was swallowed by adrenaline. He ran, stumbling on the loose earth, and with each step he heard behind him the roar of the fire preparing for final destruction. The mother threw her arms wide in despair, and for a second he believed he could reach her without anything else happening. But the road seemed to conspire against time. The gas tank exploded in a deafening explosion, lighting up the sky with a blaze that sent the crowd tumbling to the ground. The soldier felt the impact on his back, as if a wave of heat were about to knock him down, but his feet wouldn't stop. He clutched the girl to his chest and advanced until he reached her mother. As he handed her into his arms, the woman's body collapsed in tears, hugging her daughter as if she had regained part of her own soul. And then, in the heavy silence that remained after the crash, everyone around stood still. The soldier, his chest still heaving, covered in ash and blood, stared at the scene with teary eyes without saying a word. What no one knew at that moment was that, for him, this rescue wasn't just another life saved. There was something deeper, an old wound woven into the scene, as if life had given him a new chance to repair something he'd failed to save in the past. The silence after the explosion seemed weighted. Dust still floated in bright particles in the air when the first sirens wailed, and the entire road held its breath as if fearing any sudden movement. The mother, hugging her daughter, repeated the same request in trembling whispers. "Stay with me, my love, stay with me," while the soldier remained a step behind, his chest heaving, his burned hands throbbing in a rhythm that matched the return of his own heart. He noticed his own reflection in a broken window, soot in his eyes, blood on his fingers, the expression of someone who hadn't yet fully returned from the dark place where courage sometimes drives men. All around, people abandoned their cell phones, embarrassed at having filmed the tragedy as if it were a spectacle. A truck driver left his water bottle at the soldier's feet. A teenager took off his shirt and handed it to someone to apply pressure to a cut on the child's arm, and a woman, her voice breaking, began to quietly pray what she remembered from her childhood. Everything suddenly seemed human again. The soldier crouched down next to the mother, assessing the girl's breathing, the shallow movements of her chest, the fluttering of her eyelids. The smell of gasoline was still strong, so he raised his voice with practiced firmness, asking everyone to move back a few meters, to keep no one from lighting anything, to keep access to the ambulance clear. "It's going to be okay," he said to the mother, and realized his own timbre lent truth to the sentence, as if he needed to believe as much as she did. The woman looked at him as if looking for the last thread of hope and tried to thank him. But the words stuck, because at that exact moment the child moved her hand fragile, searching for something to hold. When the paramedics finally arrived and cleared a space, the soldier instinctively backed away, giving way to the precision of those who transform urgency into procedure. The mother, still on her knees, grabbed his forearm in a gesture that mixed gratitude and panic, and asked his name with an urgency almost as great as the need to save her daughter. "Nathan," he replied dryly, as if he didn't want to exist any longer than necessary. The girl, with half-closed eyes and the thick voice of someone returning from far away, murmured something only he heard. "Don't leave me." The world spun a little. The sentence crossed time and brought another road, another night, ice on the asphalt, and a car crumpled like a tin can. It brought the acidic smell of antifrizz, the help that never arrived, the door that never gave way. It brought an almost identical whisper, one that haunted him for years. He looked away from the present for a second, and only then did he understand why his legs had run without asking anything. There was an old debt between him and life. The invisible blade of memory returned to its sheath, with the touch of her small hand squeezing the fabric of his sleeve. Nathan returned fully. "I'm here," he said softly, and in that "I'm here" was everything. The sleepless nights in the barracks, the letter that never ended, the flowers left on a roadside for birthdays only he remembered. He was going to place more flowers that day, sooner or later, because the road would take him along a familiar stretch of interstate, where a wooden cross marked the spot where he had once failed. Fate, capricious, shortened the path and offered another car, another shout, another chance. The paramedic stabilized the girl, an oxygen mask fitted, a neck brace, pulses checked, and the mother, still unable to stand, repeated "thank you," as if trying to stitch life back together with the needle of gratitude. Nathan guided one of the rescuers about the leak he'd seen near the tank and indicated the best route for the rescue helicopter to land, if necessary. Practical efficiency protected him from feeling everything at once. But the protection gave way a little when the child tried to speak again, and the sound came out like a thread. "You're back." The mother, in shock, didn't notice. Nathan did. A tenderness that hurt weighed on him. He didn't argue, didn't correct, didn't rationalize the natural confusion of a dazed mind. He simply nodded, as if accepting a mission he hadn't asked for. "I'm back," he replied, and for a moment he believed those two syllables too spanned the years like a hand finally reaching out. The highway patrol cordoned off the area, an officer asked for his information, and Nathan said enough. Name, phone number, that he was coming from the east, that he saw the rollover in his rearview mirror. The officer asked if he needed medical assistance. He waved it away, though his hands shook with a sincerity his body couldn't disguise. The truck driver insisted he drink water. Nathan thanked him, drank, and felt his throat slowly accept reality. As the stretcher began to move toward the ambulance, the girl gasped for air again and, in a timid attempt, extended her fingers. They met his halfway. By barracks habit, he should back off and leave everything to the professionals. Out of manly necessity, he squeezed the small hand for a second longer, long enough to promise without words that courage doesn't end when the sirens arrive. His mother asked him to go with her to the hospital. Nathan hesitated. The police officer held him back with formal red tape, and the moment split into options. He chose to stay. Perhaps because he knew the weight of going beyond what was necessary and confusing duty with destiny. Perhaps because I knew that some goodbyes are more appropriate if they happen early. Before the door closed, the child smiled that way only survivors can smile, as if the world had been given to him again, wrapped in a pain that was already fading. The door slammed, the ambulance pulled away, and the road for a few seconds emptied of its usual noise. The wind brought the scent of pine trees and warm dust. Nathan realized he was still holding something, a bracelet of colorful beads that had been attached to his wrist during the rescue. I couldn't tell if it was a gift from the rush or a reminder of what had just happened. He tucked the bracelet into his pocket and took a deep breath, feeling for the first time in years the clock inside his chest, once again, ticking a time that didn't hurt. The police officer returned his documents, thanked him formally, and noted on his pad that the citizen had been crucial. Citizen. The word made him smile, almost invisible. He turned to his car, ready to resume his journey, but he stopped on the shoulder and looked at the long strip of asphalt that stretched ahead, blazing in the sun. To the left, far away, he knew, was the wooden cross. To the right, the town hospital. For a moment, the road seemed to ask where he ultimately wanted to go. And in the silence that followed, Nathan understood that life doesn't always offer signs. Sometimes it just offers a breather and a beginning. The small town hospital was bustling that night. The cold emergency lights flickered over hallways filled with anxious voices and hurried footsteps. The ambulance arrived carrying the mother and daughter, and immediately nurses and doctors surrounded the stretcher, ushering the girl into a room where every second mattered. Her mother tried to accompany her, but was restrained by an aide who told her to wait. She wept in despair, her hair disheveled, her dress stained with dried blood and dust, whispering the same mantra. "Stay with me, my love. Don't leave me." Nathan arrived minutes later, escorted by a police officer who insisted he be examined. His arms were still burning, his hands were covered in makeshift bandages, and the cuts on his fingers required more than a bottle of water. But as always, he played it down. He said he was fine, that he just needed to wash the wounds. The doctor insisted on stitches, rest, and antibiotics, but Nathan refused to sit down. His body remained alert, as if he were still on the side of the road, waiting for the next explosion. In the lobby, some of the people who had witnessed the accident began to arrive as well. A truck driver recounted the scene aloud to the onlookers, describing the moment the car exploded behind the soldier and how everyone believed he wouldn't make it out alive. The story spread by word of mouth, and within minutes, people were calling him a hero. Some tried to approach, ask for a photo, and thank him on behalf of the community. Nathan, however, backed away, uncomfortable with the stares that transformed him into something bigger than he felt. His mother, still trembling, searched for him with her eyes until she found him sitting in a corner, staring at the ground. She approached slowly, knelt before him, and held his bandaged hands, heedless of the blood staining his clothes. "You saved my daughter," she said through tears. Nathan shook his head, looking away, and murmured only, "I was in the right place at the right time." But deep inside, he knew it wasn't just that. There was something cruel and redemptive about having witnessed that accident on that very road, on that very day, almost as if fate had given him a second chance. Meanwhile, a local reporter arrived with a small camera trying to capture footage of the unsung hero. The police officer who had taken his statement approached and asked for his full name, insisting it would be important for the official record. Nathan hesitated, but eventually relented. The attentive reporter captured every detail, transforming what to him was just another silent struggle into a headline ready for the morning paper. "Soldier risks life to save girl from burning car," he wrote on the notepad. Yet behind every applause and look of admiration, Nathan carried the nagging memory of another night years before, when he hadn't managed to break down a car door. It was as if fate had exacted a heavy toll on him back then, taking someone he loved, and now it was giving him the opportunity to balance the scales. The image of that wooden cross on the side of the road burned in his mind, reminding him of the weight of guilt that had never lifted. The girl's smile in the hospital bed was like a balm, but also like an open wound, because it showed him that if he had had the same strength in the past, perhaps his story would have been different. Hours later, the news spread across local television. On the evening news, shaky cell phone footage showed the moment Nathan ran toward the flames. The entire town buzzed, extolling his courage. But he, sitting alone in a waiting chair, his arms throbbing and his eyes heavy, felt more vulnerable than he had ever felt on the battlefield. To others, he was the hero of the road. To him, just a man trying to settle an old score with fate. His mother returned to his side, exhausted, but with a renewed sparkle in her eyes. "She'll survive," she said, and in that instant, a weight lifted from Nathan's chest. But the relief wasn't pure. It brought with it the memory of a voice that didn't survive years ago, whispering the same plea for help he couldn't answer. Karma, he thought, doesn't forgive, but sometimes it offers a chance for redemption. He took a deep breath and looked at his mother, knowing that that road, that fire, and that child weren't just coincidence. They were the mirror of his own story, held before him so he could finally face what he'd never been able to forget. The next morning, the city looked different. The sound of radios in bakeries, the televisions blaring in roadside bars, and even the murmurs in the grocery store line revolved around the same news: the soldier who had risked his life to save a child from a burning car. Shaky cell phone footage circulated on social media, showing his silhouette against the glow of the fire, his desperate run the moment he emerged from the smoke with the girl in his arms. For everyone, it was a scene from a movie. For him, it was just the memory of a night he never wanted to relive. Nathan woke early, not because he'd rested, but because his body no longer knew how to rest. The phone in his makeshift room in the National Guard barracks was already ringing with calls from reporters, fellow soldiers and strangers wanting to interview him, thank him, and make him their symbol. He declined most, answering only the essentials, but the noise of the outside world seemed determined to invade the silence he was trying to create. In the hospital, the mother remained by her daughter's side. She slept little, watching the girl's every breath, every movement of the machines, as if afraid life might slip through her fingers again. When she saw Nathan enter the room, discreetly carrying a bag of fruit and water, her eyes filled with tears. "I don't know how to thank you," she said, squeezing his still bandaged hands. He simply shook his head uncomfortably, but agreed to sit beside her, watching the sleeping girl. It was in this silence that the mother dared to ask, "Why did you do this? Why did you risk your own life for someone you'd never met?" Nathan took a moment to answer. His fixed gaze on the child's face seemed to summon the courage to open a door he'd kept locked for years. "Because one day—" "I couldn't save the one I loved," he murmured, his voice breaking. His mother didn't insist, simply squeezed his hands again, understanding the pain he wasn't yet ready to fully reveal. That same night, as he walked through the hospital parking lot, flashes of memory began to flood his mind. The sound of a car skidding on the ice, the impact with the tree, the smell of smoke mixed with familiar perfume. He saw himself younger, desperate, trying to break down a locked door while a woman's voice called to him from inside the car. He heard the scream he never forgot, felt the helplessness that haunted him in every dream since. And then, only silence, and the image of the wooden cross placed on the shoulder days later, forever reminding him of his failure. Now, sitting in the car, he took a deep breath, fighting the weight of the memory. He understood that somehow that accident hadn't been just a fluke. It was fate returning the same scenario, as if to say, "This time, you have a chance to act." And he had acted. But the old scar didn't disappear just because another life had been saved. It simply throbbed with less pain, reminding him that life exacts its toll, but also offers moments of redemption. The news continued to spread, and the messages on his phone continued. Local authorities wanted to honor him with a ceremony. Journalists wanted to publish his story, but Nathan didn't feel like a hero. He felt too human, too flawed, and perhaps that was precisely why he had run into the flames without hesitation. His mother, for her part, was beginning to see him not just as the man who had saved her daughter, but as someone who carried a pain that connected with her own. They both knew what it was like to kneel by the side of the road and beg for life to stay. The next morning, when the girl woke for the first time and asked for water in a weak voice, Nathan was there. He instinctively got up, adjusted the pillow, and helped his mother hold the cup. The child looked at him with curious eyes and whispered, "You're the fireman." The soldier smiled at him, speechless, but in that moment he felt something change within him. It wasn't just a rescue. It was a cycle closing, or perhaps a new one opening, in which he could finally believe that despite the past, there were still reasons to keep fighting. The city began treating the event as if it were legend, even before it became a memory. At the corner cafe, they offered breakfast on the hero. At the gas station, the attendant declined the tip with a shy wave. In front of the National Guard headquarters, they left bouquets and notes taped to the gate. Nathan walked through it all like someone trying to get through a dream without waking up. He received the gesture, quietly thanked them, and moved on. What for others was consecration, for him was an uncomfortable mirror reflecting what he didn't want to face. On his phone screen, an endless stream of messages, the mayor wanting to schedule a tribute in the school auditorium, the local radio station requesting interviews, fellow soldiers sending applause and fire emojis. He watched it all from the outside, distant, like someone observing a fire, unsure whether to approach or retreat. At the hospital, his mother and daughter offered a silence he could belong to. He would arrive early, before shift change, when the hallways possess a calm the world seems to lack. His mother had been given a clean blanket and a large cup of coffee, and the girl slept with her face less tense, a delicate bandage on her forehead, and a worn teddy bear brought by a volunteer. Nathan would sit in a plastic chair and stay there, attentive to the child's breathing as if watching over an inextinguishable fire. When she woke, she would ask him to tell her the part about the rain, a story with no beginning or end that he'd made up the first morning, about clouds that learned to rain slowly so as not to disturb the windows. His mother smiled, her eyes still tired. Sometimes her fingers would seek his, simply to thank him without words, and that was enough. It was on one of these mornings that Nathan remembered the colorful beaded bracelet forgotten in his pocket. He took it out as if returning something sacred and handed it to the girl. She recognized it immediately, clutching it to her chest with the solemnity of children rediscovering small treasures. "Will you stay now?" It was an unpretentious request, but one that found every flaw in him. His mother gently intervened, saying that the fireman had other missions. Nathan nodded, accepting a painful truth. Life continued to sweep him away like a tide that obeys no one. Outside, the consecration was beginning to mingle with a harsher noise. On a social media forum, anonymous profiles were saying that everything seemed staged, that it was army propaganda, that nobody walks away from an explosion like that. At the market, a stranger cornered him in the parking lot to take a selfie, not to thank him, but to post it before everyone else. A young man posed a question that came like a stone thrown at him, wrapped in curiosity. What if you'd made a mistake? What if you had died along with it? Nathan didn't answer. He knew the secret mathematics of risk. He'd already counted these accounts on a cold night in the past, and the total back then had been a debt that couldn't be paid. Now the world seemed to want to audit a settlement without considering the previous accounting. The official invitation arrived by email and on letterhead, a recognition ceremony on Friday in the school auditorium, with a town band, a medal, and a speech from the mayor. "Your presence is essential," the letter concluded. Nathan left the envelope on the table and went for a walk. His steps took him, without being asked, back to the highway. The wooden cross was still there, slightly crooked, the letters of the name almost faded, frayed ribbons rustling in the wind. He knelt beside it as he always did on birthdays, but this time without flowers. There was ash on his fingers and a metallic taste in his mouth. He remained silent, remembering the dry click of the iron against the tree, the door that never opened, the hand that slipped from his slowly as if life were fine sand. "I'm back," he said, in a whisper that no one needed to hear. That afternoon, upon entering the girl's room, he found her mother arguing quietly with a nervous man, a worn cap in her hands, the smell of alcohol she tried to mask with breath mints. It was her father. The girl shrank back in bed at the sight of him. Her mother stood between them like a hesitant bridge. The man spoke of regret, of second chances, of signing whatever it takes. Perhaps he was sincere, perhaps not. Nathan recognized in that look the kind of guilt that arrives late, and the past touched his shoulder with cold fingers. He took a step back, ready to disappear from the scene that didn't belong to him. But the girl held the bracelet on her wrist, lifted her face and looked for Nathan first, not her father. Her mother noticed. There was a thick silence, and then she took a deep breath and asked the man to come back another day, when the girl is stronger. Her father left, mumbling promises that smelled of yesterday. Nathan was left with the discomfort of having witnessed something too intimate, and at the same time with the clear feeling that fate had not yet finished drawing lines between those 3 lives and his own. The next day, the news reporter returned to the hospital with a microphone and a larger crew. She wanted the human side of the hero, close-up footage of the embrace, tears. Nathan, tired of the role they'd forced upon him, responded with a calm no. He said the important story was on the heart monitor and in his little hands playing with beads, that the rest could wait. The crew persisted until his mother, with sweet firmness, thanked them and asked them to leave him alone. The reporter backed away, embarrassed, and someone in the hallway murmured that he didn't want the spotlight because real heroes are like that. Nathan smiled almost imperceptibly. There was no heroism in what I felt, just a need to breathe slowly. That night, alone in his dorm, he opened the mayor's letter again. He remembered the girl's request. "Will you stay now?" And the way the words stirred places he wouldn't let anyone enter. Perhaps the public tribute was unnecessary noise. But perhaps, and that perhaps weighed on him in a different way, the city needed that ceremony less for him and more for itself, like someone who needs to name the courage they want to cultivate. And perhaps the girl needed to see that courage also fits in uncomfortable situations. Karma continued to whisper beneath things, not as a threat, but as a reminder that every choice now weaves the fabric of a future we don't yet know. Nathan picked up his pen and wrote a short reply to the office. "I will be there." And as the ink dried, he felt that saying yes to the city was, in some way, saying yes to a part of himself he had spent years refusing. Friday arrived as a day that seemed bigger than the others. The municipal school auditorium was packed, with flags positioned in the background, a pulpit decorated with simple flowers, and the town band tuning instruments at the side of the stage. Children in uniforms ran through the hallways, curious to get a closer look at the man who had appeared in the news. For the community, this would be a night of celebration, a shared pride. For Nathan, it was a burden he wore poorly. He entered through the side doors, his uniform hastily ironed, his gaze discreet, and was immediately surrounded by greetings, hugs, hands that squeezed too tightly, cameras that flashed endlessly. The mayor, a smiling, eloquent man, took the stage and began his speech by extolling the bravery of a son of this land who had shown the world the value of duty and courage. Each sentence felt like an invisible medal hanging on Nathan's chest, but he felt the weight increase rather than ease. Sitting in the front row, the girl's mother watched him with teary eyes, and the child, still in a cast, clutched the colorful bracelet and never took her eyes off him, as if she were the only person capable of seeing him beyond the title of hero. When he was finally called to the stage, the applause echoed like a wave. Nathan walked slowly, each step heavier than the last. He accepted the medal, listened to the speeches, smiled for the photos, but deep inside only one scene replayed: the burning car, the child's voice, the echo of the explosion, and behind it all, the memory of the lost night, of the voice he could never save. He took a deep breath before the microphone, and when everyone expected memorized words, he simply said, "I'm not a hero. I'm just a man who did what needed to be done. Any of you would have done the same." The silence that followed was brief but profound, as if the community had paused to reflect on the weight of those words. Then, something no one expected happened. In the middle of the audience, the child's father appeared, the same man with the tired look and the barely concealed smell of alcohol, pushing through the crowd with a nervous smile. "Is this the real hero?" he said loudly, drawing the crowd's attention. "Or was he just lucky to be at the right time? Where was all that applause when I was taking care of her?" The words were fragile, but charged with resentment. A murmur ran through the auditorium. The mother shrank in her seat, and the girl clutched her bracelet as if it were a shield. Nathan remained silent for a few moments, staring at the man who seemed more lost than aggressive. The audience began to boo. The mayor tried to intervene, but it was the girl who changed everything. Her voice still weak but firm, she rose from her chair and said, "He saved me. You weren't there, he was." The impact was immediate. The father recoiled, embarrassed, as tears streamed down the mother's face. The audience, moved, applauded again, no longer in empty celebration, but as testimony to a truth that had been spoken by the most innocent mouth in the room. Nathan felt the ground shift beneath his feet. He hadn't expected that defense, hadn't expected the child herself, so fragile and scarred by trauma, to be the voice confirming what he was trying to deny. The girl walked to the stage, supported by her mother, and asked to hold his hand. He bent down, allowing her small fingers to meet his in front of everyone. The audience remained silent for seconds until a collective sob filled the auditorium. At that moment, Nathan understood that the ceremony wasn't about medals or political speeches, but about the invisible bond that fate had forged between him, that mother, and that child. And suddenly he realized that karma doesn't just present itself in tragedies, but also in unexpected opportunities for reparation. It didn't replace the past, but rather gave a different meaning to the present. When he left the stage, the entire city seemed different. No longer spectators of a story, but witnesses to a transformation. He had arrived carrying an old burden, and now he left with a silent promise engraved in his soul that life, however hard, still knew how to restore paths where before there had been only ruins. The night after the ceremony brought a different silence, the kind that remains after applause that lasted too long. The city slept proudly, but Nathan did not. He went to the hospital first thing in the morning and found the girl coloring with borrowed crayons, drawing a car surrounded by flames, and beside it, a tall figure with an outstretched hand. At the bottom, in crooked letters, he wrote, "You're back." His mother watched from her armchair, exhausted and grateful, with a weariness that wasn't just from the accident, it was from years of holding the world in both hands. When Nathan entered, the girl held up the drawing as if showing proof. He approached slowly, fearing the weight of meaning more than he could offer, and yet he felt himself fitting into that paper, as if life had designed for him a place that had always existed. His mother thanked him again, but now there was something else behind the gratitude, a contained fear. His father had sent messages again during the night, hinting that he would seek custody, saying that now he would do everything right. His mother spoke softly, choosing words that wouldn't hurt her dignity, and Nathan understood without her asking. If the man showed up drunk again, there would be trouble. If he showed up sober, there would be promises. In either scenario, there would be threats. That same day, a social worker came by the room, jotted down details of the accident, and asked about his routine, school, and support network. Her professional gaze was correct but impassive, and his mother wilted a little under questions that smacked of judgment. Nathan's name was entered in the report as a rescue witness. The worker insinuated that his word would carry weight in any eventual hearing. He nodded out of obligation, but inside he saw the hallway of a courtroom he never wanted to cross. The past had doors he kept closed. On the way out, his mother caught up with him in the hallway and asked almost apologetically if he could come home that night to help change the water jug and move a piece of furniture. She didn't want his father to use any excuse to return. Nathan hesitated for a painful second, considering the risk of allowing himself to be a part of it, but he said yes. At night, his mother's apartment smelled of simple soup and washed floors. The girl giggled softly at an old cartoon, and there was a handmade piece there, fragile and honest, built with little. Nathan replaced the gallon jug, repaired the furniture, removed an old screw from the lock, and installed a new chain. Meanwhile, he taught the child a breathing exercise he'd learned in training. Count to 4 to inhale, hold for 4, exhale for 4. The girl did it, focused, and her small chest obeyed as if someone were opening a window. Her mother watched, and in her eyes was a relief that needed no words. The knock on the door came like a punch. Dad, too sober to be trusted, rushed in with excuses and a crumpled bouquet. He spoke of moving, a new job, therapy appointments. He asked to go out with the girl, just for ice cream, half an hour. His mother stiffened, but it was the girl who flinched, the beaded bracelet tightening on her wrist. Nathan took a step back, ready to avoid being an obstacle or a crutch. The man noticed his presence, and wounded pride lit a grim gleam in his eyes. The conversation soured, and it didn't take long for the tone to rise. His father said he'd have a judge on his side. That stage hero didn't change the law. The word judge hung in the air like a blade. Nathan felt the old escape mechanism, get out before becoming part of the problem. But the girl watched him from the sofa, as if holding a rope. He breathed in a count of 4 and his voice was calm. It wasn't a night for a walk. The child needed to rest. He himself could accompany his mother to the courthouse when necessary. Dad grumbled, swore under his breath, and slammed the door shut. The silence that remained was cracked. His mother trembled, not from fear but from exhaustion. Nathan gathered up the invisible shards and went to the window to close the latch. When he returned, the girl was already breathing at the rhythm he'd taught her. His mother said thank you again, but this time her thank you came with a question she hadn't asked. How long are you going to stay? In the early hours of the morning, the notification arrived on the phone. A summons for a preliminary hearing on Monday, a request for temporary joint custody. Nathan's name appeared as a key witness. He sat at the apartment table, staring at the digital sheet as if it were a mirror. He remembered the day he didn't go to court to testify about the night of the ice, when he thought silence was a form of protection, and discovered late that omission also weighs heavily on the scales of fate. The road, the cross, the whisper, "Don't leave me." Karma didn't demand explanations. It demanded presence. When the clock struck 3:30, Nathan sent 2 short messages. To his mother, "I'll go with you on Monday." To himself, in a note with no recipient, "Don't run away." Then he tucked the girl's drawing into his phone case, as if he needed a map to navigate what was coming. Outside, the city slept again, unaware that some battles are not won in fire, but in cold rooms where truth must learn to speak aloud. Monday dawned grey, as if the sky reflected the tension in the air. The small-town courthouse had worn walls, the smell of stale coffee, and the hurried footsteps of lawyers accustomed to turning lives into pages of legal proceedings. Nathan entered beside his mother and the girl, his uniform discreet, but with the erect posture of someone carrying something larger than himself. The child held his hand tightly, his eyes wide as if entering unfamiliar territory. His father was already there, awkwardly dressed in a tie, trying to appear sober, with a cheap lawyer at his side and a look that mixed shame and wounded pride. The courtroom was simple: a wooden table, stacks of documents, a stern-looking judge, glasses firmly perched on her face, and a sharp voice. The first words were formal, but the air seemed too heavy to accommodate such formal phrases. The mother was heard first. Her voice trembled but found strength as she spoke of the accident, her fear of losing her daughter, and her father's absence at critical moments. The man's lawyer tried to interrupt, saying that one mistake doesn't erase the right to be a father, but the judge silenced him with a curt gesture. When Nathan's turn came, all eyes turned to him. The opposing attorney tried to paint him as an intruder seeking attention and prestige, insinuating that his presence in the case was excessive. Nathan took a deep breath, remembering the exercise he had taught the girl. He inhaled in 4 counts, held it and spoke quietly but with a firmness that filled the room. He recounted how he found the burning car, how he heard his mother's pleas, how he saw the girl trapped in the wreckage. He described every detail, not to impress, but to show that he was there, that he had experienced it, that there was no room for doubt. The room fell silent as he concluded. "I'm not here by choice. I'm here because I was on the road when no one else was. I'm not seeking a replacement or a title. I simply believe that a child needs security, and security isn't built on broken promises." The judge stared at him for long seconds, and it was impossible not to notice the restrained gleam in her eyes, as if the coldness of the position had found a way into humanity. The nervous father stood up abruptly, trying to argue. He spoke of starting over, of therapy, of second chances. He said everyone makes mistakes, and that he too had the right to prove he'd changed. The judge listened in silence, but the girl instinctively squeezed Nathan's hand tighter, and it was this simple, childlike, and sincere gesture that carried more than any argument. In the end, the provisional decision didn't give anyone a victory, but it did draw clear boundaries. Primary custody would remain with the mother, and the father would be entitled to supervised visitation. The hearing would end there, but the feeling was that something bigger had been decided, not on paper but in the hearts present. As everyone began to leave, the judge discreetly called Nathan over and said quietly, "Sometimes life puts us in the same scenario twice. It's not a coincidence, it's called." He didn't respond, just nodded respectfully, but those words would haunt him far beyond that building. As they left, their father watched them from afar. His face hardened, as if he had lost more than he cared to admit. He said nothing, just turned and disappeared into the parking lot. His mother sighed with relief, but Nathan knew this wasn't the end. It was just another chapter in a story that fate insisted on writing with lines of fire, pain, and redemption. That night, alone in his quarters, he took off the medal the mayor had given him and left it on the table. He looked at the cold metal gleaming in the dim light and felt it didn't belong to him. The real prize lay in the girl's drawing taped to the minibar door, the burning car, the figure standing with a hand outstretched, and beneath it, the crooked words, "You've returned." This was the trophy that weighed and healed at the same time. Nathan realized that as much as the past still hurt, life was offering him a path he could no longer ignore. Perhaps karma wasn't just punishment. Perhaps it was also a chance to make amends, to rewrite, to prove that when the road takes a toll, it also gives back. The days following the hearing were slower, as if time had decided to lighten the load after the tension in court. The girl was beginning to recover. The cast on her arm no longer seemed so uncomfortable, and her laughter once again filled the corners of the small apartment. Nathan began to visit them often, always bringing something simple, a bag of groceries, a children's book, sometimes just his own presence. His mother greeted him with tired but sincere smiles, and with each visit he seemed lighter, as if part of the responsibility of carrying the world finally had someone to lean on. One afternoon, the three of them sat on the building's narrow porch. The sun gilded the city rooftops, and the girl, the colorful bracelet still on her wrist, asked Nathan if he had a family yet. He swallowed hard before answering, his gaze averted to the horizon. "I did, and I lost it," he said quietly, letting the silence complete what words couldn't. His mother noticed but didn't insist. She simply placed her hand over his, a simple gesture that said, "No need to explain anything else now." But while life inside that small home began to take on a peaceful feel, outside, his father brooded over his defeat. Resentful of the court ruling, he felt exposed and diminished in the eyes of the community. His colleagues at the bar whispered, some mocking his absence on the day of the accident, and others extolling Nathan as a true example of courage. Wounded pride turned to resentment. He began to prowl the building, hoping to find a way out, sometimes sending messages to his mother in the early hours of the morning, sometimes promising to move, sometimes threatening to request a review of custody. With each beat of her cell phone, her heart raced, and Nathan, even from a distance, could sense the fear lurking behind her eyes when the phone vibrated. One night, as he was leaving the barracks, Nathan found his father leaning against his car, waiting for him. The man was sober, but his eyes betrayed his unease. "You think you're going to take my place?" he said bluntly. Nathan remained calm, simply saying he didn't want any place, just to protect his daughter from further trauma. His father laughed bitterly, saying that a stage hero doesn't support a family, and that soon everyone would see his true colors. Before leaving, he threw a crumpled copy of a document on the ground, a request for a custody review, this time including accusations that Nathan was manipulating the child against her own father. Nathan stood there, watching the paper fly in the night wind, feeling the old feeling that fate would never leave him alone. He hadn't sought to get involved, but life dragged him into a seemingly endless conflict. Still, when he returned to the apartment and saw the girl asleep on the couch, the bracelet glinting in the dim light of the television, he understood there was no choice but to continue. Karma was exacting, but also guiding. He was in the same situation as before, but this time he had the chance not to back down. His mother noticed his heavy expression and asked almost in a whisper, "He looked for you, didn't he?" Nathan nodded but didn't elaborate. He simply said, "I'll be here no matter what he does." And that promise, spoken without grandiosity, was enough to bring tears to her eyes. In that moment, it wasn't about romance or destiny, but about survival, about knowing someone would be there when doors slammed shut at night and shadows tried to enter. Meanwhile, across town, his father signed new papers with anger, disguised as determination, ready to turn the courtroom into a battlefield. And, without anyone noticing, Nathan's past and present began to merge. Once again, he stood before a fire that could consume everything, and once again, fate demanded courage not to face flames, but to face truths that burned within. Night fell heavily, bringing with it a cold wind that seemed to herald a storm. The small apartment was silent. The girl had fallen asleep on the couch. The television murmured cartoons at a low volume, and the exhausted mother dozed in the armchair. Nathan stood by the window, watching the nearly deserted street, lit only by the yellowed streetlights. For days he had sensed something, his father's distant gaze, the insistent messages, the barely concealed anger. The air that night was too thick for it to be mere coincidence. The first sign came with hurried footsteps on the building's stairs, a stumble, a muffled curse, and then the dull sound of a loud knock on the door. His mother woke with a start, her heart racing before she even got up. Nathan gestured with his hand, beckoning her to stay behind. His father's voice echoed outside, slurred by alcohol. "Open this door! She's my daughter, and you're not going to keep me from her!" The knock repeated, louder, rattling the lock Nathan had reinforced days before. The girl woke with a start, her eyes wide with terror. She ran into her mother's arms, who hugged her tightly, as if to shield her from the threatening sound. Nathan stood firm in front of the door, feeling each blow reverberate in his chest like the echo of ancient battles. His father, on the other side, shouted promises and insults, demanding entry, speaking of rights and revenge. The smell of alcohol seeped through the cracks, mixed with the anger that was almost boiling over. In a desperate impulse, the man began to hit it with something heavy, perhaps a piece of wood or an iron bar. The wood of the door groaned under the impact, and the mother's heart raced. "He's going to break," she whispered, trembling. Nathan took a deep breath, the old military instinct awakening within him. He looked around, assessing every detail as if it were a battlefield. The girl cried softly, hidden in her mother's lap, and it was that sound, more than any scream, that moved him. When the lock finally gave with a click, Nathan held the door with his shoulder, delaying entry. His father pushed violently, his face flushed, his eyes wide with fury and humiliation. "Get out of the way! She's my daughter!" he roared. Nathan didn't respond immediately, just kept pressing until, in a calculated movement, he opened the door wide enough for the man to stumble inside. The impact was swift. Nathan grabbed him by the arm, spun him against the wall, and pinned him firmly. There was no unnecessary brutality, just the precise force of someone who knows that innocent lives depend on control. The mother screamed for them to stop. The girl cried even louder, and for a moment the entire apartment felt like a box of fear, anger, and despair. The father struggled, but Nathan's strength was unshakable. He leaned close to the man's ear and said softly, with a calm that cut through more than shouts, "You've already lost the right to scare this child. If you want to fight, do it in court, not here. You're not getting in today." Sirens wailed in the distance, called by neighbors who had heard the commotion. The father tried to break free, but as the sound approached, his body sagged in resignation. Nathan released him slowly, keeping himself between him and the mother. When the police entered the door, they found the scene all too clear. A drunk, aggressive man and a soldier standing, protecting a family. The officers didn't hesitate to handcuff him. As he was led away, the father still glanced at his daughter, but found no response. The girl hid in her mother's chest, her face buried, refusing to look at him. After the door closed and silence returned, the apartment seemed different. The mother collapsed in tears, shaking with exhaustion. The girl, still frightened, went to Nathan and grabbed his hand. "You didn't let him in," she said, her voice fragile but firm. Those words struck him more than any medal, because they were proof that that night, fate had given him the chance to not fail. Nathan sat, exhausted, feeling the weight of the entire scene. The past burned inside him, remembering the car in the ice, the door that never opened, the scream he couldn't save. But now there was a contrast, a living child, protected, safe in his arms. It wasn't victory, it didn't erase scars, but it was the kind of redemption only karma could write. And he realized that somehow he was more connected to that mother and daughter than he dared admit. The early morning hours after the arrest brought a silence that finally seemed breathable. The hallway smelled of stale coffee and disinfectant, and the mother, her eyes swollen, signed papers with a hand that still trembled. Protective order, visits suspended until evaluation, psychological counseling for the girl. The social worker spoke in a neutral tone, but there was a discreet kindness when she looked at the child. She noted the incident at the door, the attempted break-in, the alcohol. Nathan stood nearby, without needing to say anything. His presence was enough to make everything there feel more solid. When the officers returned simply to confirm the protocol, the girl rested her forehead on his arm, as if checking to see if the world was still right. It was. The city, which had been an audience the day before, awoke divided between those who preferred the comfort of legend and those who finally faced the unphotogenic details of real life. Some said, "Poor thing," with pity and distance. Others offered a ride, a food basket, the number of a trusted lawyer. At the hospital, nurses left notes with crooked hearts on the girl's bed. At reception, a security guard offered to escort them to their car upon discharge. The mother accepted everything with shy gratitude, leaning back in the knowledge that, at least for a few hours, no one would knock on the door. Nathan, in the background, moved as if he had learned to keep quiet. He adjusted an outlet, found an extension cord, filled out forms that required a steady hand. The discharge came on a blue morning, the kind that seems like a blessing. The nurse placed the usual paperwork in the plastic folder, and among them in typed letters was the girl's full name. It was the mother who said it aloud, proud and soft, as if presenting her own heart. The first name everyone knew, her last name, and a middle name Nathan hadn't expected to hear. It was the same one he carried like a ghost in the memory of the icy shoulder, the same one that rested beneath the wooden cross on the interstate. The sound of that name passed through him like a stinging breeze. It didn't hurt like before, it ignited. He smiled slightly without explaining, and the mother, without understanding, returned the smile as if sensing coincidences that are more than coincidence. Back at the apartment, the first night without sirens was a lesson in normalcy. They ate soup and bread for dinner, watched an old cartoon, and the girl asked Nathan to tell her again the story of the rain that learns to fall slowly. He told it quietly, as if tuning out the world, and when she fell asleep with the bracelet glowing on her wrist, his mother accompanied him to the door in a silence that said more than any long conversation. "Thank you for not leaving when it got hard," she whispered, and it felt like an informal pact to them both. Nathan descended the stairs slowly, knowing that each step took him further away from a house that was beginning to recognize him as part of its contours. On the way back, the road called. He obeyed. He stopped the car on the familiar shoulder, got out with his discharge briefcase on the passenger seat, and walked to the wooden cross, now less crooked because the last week's rain had settled the earth. He took the ceremony medal, cold and clean, from his pocket and stood there for a moment, simply holding it, feeling the weight of the metal on his fingertips. He didn't hang it. Not yet. Instead, he wiped the plaque with his thumb, brushed away dry leaves, straightened a ribbon, and softly spoke the name he had just heard in the hospital, as if presenting two banks of the same river, the one that was gone and the one that remained. The wind responded with a short whisper, the kind that doesn't frighten, and he understood that life was teaching him a different grammar, that of accepting coincidences as invitations. In the following days, healing routines arrived. Going to school to excuse absences, the appointment with the child psychologist, the social worker's visit to check the window locks, and the chain on the door. Nathan was there for each of these small, life-saving things, not as a hero but as someone who carries bags and signs where needed when his mother's hand gets tired. His father, released on conditional release, disappeared from the neighborhood for a time that was enough for the muscles of fear to relax a little. The girl went back to sleep without a jolt in the early hours of the morning. One night, before closing her eyes, she asked if Nathan would attend Heroes' Day at school, an event improvised by the principal to talk about courage and care. He said yes, but didn't yet know what he would say. He was wary of speeches that sound nice but forget the after part. That same night, he opened his discharge folder and reread his full name as if checking a map. Next to it, he left the medal. It all seemed to call for a gesture, a kind of response to the whim of fate. It wouldn't be grand, it would be simple, like almost everything that truly matters. Tomorrow, he thought, he would bring fresh flowers to the cross and perhaps finally leave there the medal the city had hung on his chest. And in the school auditorium, when they called him to the stage, he would speak of the courage that comes after, the courage of staying. Because sometimes the fire isn't the hardest part. The hardest part is learning to live with empty hands after the flame dies down and still wanting to warm someone with them. In the end, before bed, he sent a short message to his mother. "I'll come by early tomorrow to pick you up." Then he photographed the drawing the girl had made, the car, the figure extending its hand, the crooked letters, and set it as his wallpaper. It wasn't a trophy or a charm, it was a reminder. The road was still there, begging for answers with the hot asphalt. But for the first time in years, he felt he could steer his own wheel. And life, patiently, seemed to align the two stories so that at just the right moment one would repair the other. Tomorrow, school, then the cross, and then, who knows, a small gesture that ties past and present in the same knot. The morning of the school ceremony dawned bright, almost ironic in its beauty, as if the sky wanted to prove that, even after so many difficult nights, it could still offer a clear day. The schoolyard was decorated with posters made by children, colorful drawings of firefighters, doctors, police officers, and now also a soldier holding a child. The principal, moved, announced Heroes Day, a simple event, but charged with meaning for the community still breathing the history of the accident. Nathan arrived in uniform, discreetly, trying to blend in with the parents and teachers, but his presence didn't go unnoticed. Children ran toward him, some asking for an autograph, others simply touching him as if confirming that the figure on television was real. The girl pulled him by the hand to the front row, as proud as if she'd brought her own guardian to school. Her mother, nearby, watched with teary eyes, perhaps more from the future she was beginning to glimpse than from the past that still haunted her. When Nathan was finally called to the stage, silence fell over the room. He took a deep breath, remembering the exercise he'd taught the girl, and calmly took the microphone. "I didn't come here to talk about courage in the fire. I came to talk about the courage that happens afterward," he began. "Courage is a mother who doesn't abandon her child even when all seems lost. Courage is a child who learns to laugh again after crying. Courage is staying when it would be easier to leave." The audience remained in reverent silence, absorbing every word. And then suddenly, the girl rose from her chair and walked toward him, a bracelet glinting on her small wrist. She took the microphone from his hand and said with the disarming simplicity only children possess, "He's not just the fireman, he's the man who came back." The impact of those words echoed louder than any rehearsed speech. The teachers wept, the parents applauded, and even the principal brought her hand to her face to hold back tears. Nathan remained motionless for a moment, his eyes welling up, feeling that this was the moment fate had been preparing since the cold night he had failed. The past, finally, had found an answer. After the ceremony, the community gathered in the courtyard, embracing him, offering words. But Nathan seemed to hear only the girl's echoing whisper, "You're back." It was as if each syllable was an antidote to years of silence and pain. He said goodbye simply, but in his heart he carried a weight that for the first time didn't crush. It held. That afternoon he drove alone to the road where the wooden cross stood. The sky was beginning to turn golden, and the wind blew gently across the fields. He parked, walked to the shoulder and knelt before the cross. He took the medal he'd received at the town ceremony from his pocket and placed it at the foot of the marker, not as a trophy, but as an offering. Then he removed the drawing of the girl from his phone and carefully placed a laminated copy attached to the wood, next to the cross. There lay the two stories, one lost, the other saved. Karma, silent, sealed the encounter. Nathan stood, taking a deep breath. There were no more screams in his memory, only a whisper turned into a promise. He looked at the horizon and murmured, "I'm back." And this time, I stayed. The words weren't for the road, nor the wind, but for himself. Deep in his chest, he felt he could finally walk in peace. When he returned to the apartment, his mother and daughter were waiting for him on the balcony. There were no grand declarations, just looks that said what a lifetime of speeches never could. The girl ran to him, hugging him tightly, and his mother, silent, simply nodded, her eyes filling with tears. In that moment, Nathan understood that he didn't need titles, honors, or public forgiveness. His redemption lay there, in two lives that fate had entrusted to him. Karma had come full circle. Where there had once been loss, there was now protection. Where there had been silence, there was now a childlike voice saying, "You've returned." And the road, which had always brought him ghosts, finally gave him a home. If this story touched you in any way, please like and subscribe to the channel. What does it mean to you to come back when life gives you a new chance? Your opinion can inspire others who also carry their silent battles. And don't forget, the next story is already waiting for you in the video that appears on the screen.